Hello and welcome. Thank you for joining this Niem webinar on refugee integration in Europe. The Migration Policy Group is organizing this together with the Institute of Public Affairs on the occasion of the launch of our new policy brief, which links the results of the national integration evaluation mechanisms to the EU Action Plan on Integration and Inclusion. So today we want to discuss and explore together what this comparative research on refugee integration policies in the EU tells about gaps and needs in member states, and how the EU Action Plan represents an opportunity to fill these gaps in terms of improved national policies and EU support. We have a very dense agenda today. First, I will explain very briefly what the Niem initiative is about, for those of you who hear about it the first time, and also present, just as a flashlight, some key overall results. Then we are very glad that the European Commission is joining us today. Welcome Angelique Petritz from DG Home, who will present the EU Action Plan. Then my colleague Sinem will lead a conversation with 4 Niem partners on how the EU Action Plan can be used to improve the integration frameworks of member states. Thanks for being with us today. And at the end, we will provide a short outlook to the upcoming results of Niem. We will be very happy to answer the many questions that you will have for the speakers. Please write them in the chat box already during the presentations and the panel debate. We will answer them all in the Q&A parts. So what is Niem about? Basically, Niem is regular monitoring of government policies for the integration of beneficiaries of international protection in the EU. It is based on indicators, more than 170, really to measure the quality of policies and the state of development. It is an evidence-based tool for policymakers to identify gaps and needs and to provide a roadmap towards a more comprehensive integration framework. The Niem project lasts for 6 years, started in 2016. The first step was to establish this indicator system and conduct baseline research in 14 countries that are involved. But Niem is not only about research, it is also about policy dialogue and the creation of national advocacy coalitions. So there is a very strong outreach element here. And then there are 2 rounds of evaluations to measure progress made and expand the scope of the research. What we present today and what we refer to in our new policy brief is the first evaluation, which is based on data from 2019, was published last year. A number of publications are coming out of Niem. There are 3 EU-wide comparative reports, the last one forthcoming. These comparative reports refer both to recognized refugees and beneficiaries of subsidiary protection. Then in each evaluation round, there are in-depth national reports published by the partners in these 14 partner states. There are policy briefs like the one we are launching today, and there are special analyses. What else is important to know about Niem? These are the 14 countries involved. Actually, this is a very representative sample of the EU as a whole, big countries, small countries, north and south, east and west. The indicators systematically cover all relevant dimensions of integration. So there are legal indicators, for example, on residency and citizenship. And there's the whole range of socio-economic and social-cultural integration areas, including the dimension on building bridges between the receiving society and refugees, and on participation. Very important is that the indicators are all derived from EU and international standards. So they are really rooted in the Geneva Convention, in what EU asylum legislation says, in EU policy standards, meaning that our benchmark here in the end is what governments have agreed on and what they are committed to in terms of what refugee integration policies should entail. The types of indicators included in this index actually represents the very concrete steps governments need to take in order to build a comprehensive integration framework. We have legal indicators, we have policy indicators, we have indicators on implementation and collaboration, which look into the cooperation in place between governments and stakeholders like local authorities, civil society, when it comes to developing policies in partnership and implementing them. We have data-related indicators, there are financial indicators and outcome indicators. Our comparative research really concentrates, and the reports concentrate on the first three steps here, legal policy and collaboration indicators, because we are here not faced with data gaps, and a real comparison is possible. And just to give you a taste about the overall picture, when we look at all countries together and across all the assessed dimensions and policy areas, what you can see here are the results for the legal framework, the supporting policies, and the collaboration indicators. We score on a scale from 0 to 100. So countries are fairly good in ensuring access to rights and making sure that there is this legal framework in place, but it's by far not perfect. There is much less in place in terms of policies. It is even below a score of 50, so far from being advantageous. And the concerning implementation and collaboration, the picture is even worse. What you can also see here is that between 2017 and 2019, this first evaluation period, there was scarcely any development, if at all, in this step on implementation and collaboration, which is actually quite surprising given the salience of migrant integration in the public debate in these years. Now, if we look at individual countries, actually only very few have seen improvements in this period. France, Lithuania, Latvia, Slovenia. Romania even fell back. When we look at the areas which have seen improvements, it was mostly in employment, health, and education. Sectors that were backsliding mostly were residency, housing, and health. And the really weakest results can be found throughout all countries, referring to participation and cooperation with stakeholders in the development and implementation of policies. What you cannot see here are the huge discrepancies among member states that exist in all these dimensions. We will come back to that a little bit later. I would leave it with that at the moment. And I would say, let's listen to the European Commission on what the action plan has to say about all these areas where Niem has identified needs for improvement. Angelique, the floor is yours.
Thank you. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay. So if you can upload the presentation, please. Great. Okay. So yeah, all these areas are in the action plan. And of course, the action plan has a scope much larger than refugees. It's third country nationals and also can be also EU citizens with a migrant background. But of course, you find, yes, all when seeing the report, I mean, I found all these things are extremely relevant and work very well with our areas of consideration. So the action plan, which was presented last year, was adopted last year, end of last year. It's a sort of a follow-up of the first action plan on integration, which was in 2016. So when we conducted the evaluation of the 2016 action plan, we identified some areas of improvement. So we put more focus on these areas on the new action plan. And one of these areas is the scope. As I've just said, is not limited to third country nationals, as was the 2016 action plan, but also it covers, it has a much larger scope because we discovered that also second generation of migrants are sometimes discriminated in education, in employment, etc. So we needed to enlarge the scope. Stronger focus on women. Because the women, we also saw that they're the first to suffer in employment, for instance, and in education. And the role of host society in the integration process, because of course, we always say integration is a two-way process. So not only migrants should be willing to integrate, but also the society should be open. And so we need to work more on the society and create more links between the society and the migrant society. You know, the whole society and the migrants. So the next, please. So which are the main principles underpinning the action plan? It's again, inclusion for all, mainstreaming gender and anti-discrimination priorities, support at all stages of the integration process. Integration starts early, should start early, but it can go over generations. You know, some people say it never ends. I don't want to be that pessimistic. Maximize EU added value through multi-stakeholder partnerships. It's very important because integration happens locally, but often is managed centrally. So we need to create strong links between central government and local authorities, but also between private sector, NGOs, public sector. So all these links are extremely important because they all play their role, and sometimes they don't work so well, or one sector doesn't talk to the other sector, for instance. So this is very important to encourage cooperation and targeted support where needed. Like, for instance, as I said, migrant women can be unaccompanied minors in case of refugees. Next, please. So we have identified some sectors. Next slide. Yeah. So we have sectoral areas of action. There are 4. So education and training. So I try to focus on what we expect, what we encourage member states to do. As you know very well, integration is a national competence. So we cannot do more as Commission than encourage, support, fund, but we cannot impose, we don't have legislation on integration. So what we would like to see, we would like to see more migrant children in early childhood education and care, And why? Because this, it's very important to start very early, also with learning the language of the host country, but this will also help mothers to be able to find employment, for instance, if their children are in early childhood care. Teachers should be better equipped to manage multicultural and multilingual classes. Often this is not the case, so we encourage member states to implement programs for that. I have some examples in mind. For instance, Germany is amazing what they do. I mean, with the specialization of teachers and the courses, and then they have to pass exams in order to be able to teach migrants. In Greece, you have some classes which maybe they're compulsory, but they're online and maybe people don't even watch. And there's no test after that or anything. So you see, there are many different approaches. You know that very well. So qualifications acquired in non-EU countries should be recognized faster and more easily. So member states should do more for that. And language training and civic orientation programs should start from day one of migrants arriving and been follow them in all their path. Also, I mean, language learning is very important, not to give only language courses on a very low level, I mean, A1 or A2, it's often the case, but arrive until C2 for people who could follow. Next, please. So the next one, employment and skills. The next slide, please. So what do we want member states to do in terms of employment? We encourage them to reinforce anti-discrimination measures in the recruitment process and workplace, because this is a base, you know, it's a basis in order to allow migrants to be recruited, you know, equal in the same on the same equal basis as residents. Migrant entrepreneurs should be helped, should be, if they want to create their own business, they should receive more support, also in terms of training and in terms of funding. More migrant women should participate in the labor market, and we should support that with specific training, but also with, as I said, the childcare. The assessment of migrant skills should be more effective and faster. We should use the EU skills profile tool for third country nationals, because migrants very often are employed in jobs which are under their qualifications. They're overqualified for the jobs. And this should stop to be the rule. I mean, we want to change this. And more migrants should participate in high quality vocational education and training. Next one, please. So health is the third area. The next slide. So in terms of health, what we would like member states to do. First, migrants should be informed about their rights. Previous one, yes. And have equal access to regular health care, including mental health services. And this is very important because they have, especially refugees, they have experienced traumas arriving in Europe, so they need to have access to mental health. And a very important element there is to have proper interpreters who are properly trained to work in health and to work in mental health. And sometimes interpreters are not properly, not to say always, I don't want to say that, but they're not properly trained. So in the new AMI, for instance, call, there was a specific strand for interpreting training for migrants. So migrant women face specific challenges in terms of also prenatal and postnatal health care, but also other issues who should be supported by women interpreters or women doctors. So this is also something that should be addressed. And last but not least, healthcare workers should receive proper training on diversity management and what are these needs of specific groups, for instance, unaccompanied minors or migrant women. So this is a basic, I mean, there are many more recommendations. I mean, this is what is the most important, of course. Next, please. So this is housing is the last. is the last area. The next slide. So what do we encourage member states to do? We would like them to facilitate migrants' access to adequate and affordable housing. Previous, please. Even in countries where there's no social housing, there should be mechanisms to allow migrants to have access to adequate and affordable housing. And there are mechanisms, there are initiatives in member states. So to provide for refugees now adapted and autonomous housing solutions as early as possible is very important. And when, even to asylum seekers, and when asylum seekers become beneficiaries of international protection, when they have the asylum status, then they should be allowed to have a smooth transition to independent living. And this is very important for their dignity, because if you don't have a house, how can you have a job? How can you learn things? How can you integrate to society? Is extremely important. And this is why housing should be an integrated approach and should be coordinated with the other policies on access, for instance, to employment, education, healthcare, and social services. So housing should be, part of this policy. So a few words about how now, because how is a bit the same in all four areas. Mainly it's funding. This is what we can provide, but it's also future learning. Mutual learning, is about creating links between the different stakeholders, and also guide the stakeholders to find the proper funding. Next slide, please. So we have also horizontal actions which underpin all four areas. So next slide, please. So building strong partnerships. I mentioned already that it's very important to bring together national authorities, local and regional authorities, host communities, civic society, and social and economic partners, because integration is a very complex process that lasts very long, and we need all these partners on board if we want to have successful integration. They all play their part. Next, please. So the fund is about funding. So funding, of course, it's a very important tool. Next slide, please. So it's not only the AMIF, the fund we have in DG Home, we manage in DG Home, the Asylum Migration Integration Fund, which will be now mostly used for early integration measures. But we encourage stakeholders to use other funds like the European Social Fund Plus, which can be very well used for social integration, for instance, or the ERDF, the European Regional Development Fund, which could be used in order to build infrastructure. So there should be cooperation between these funds. Our colleagues in the different Commission departments are aware of that. We have meetings with them, but we need to pass the word, and we need to have also the national authorities on board of that, because I've seen countries with ministries don't talk to each other. And you have one ministry managing one fund, other ministry managing ESF, one managing AMIF, and they don't talk to each other. So I know it's not easy. I mean, it's bureaucracy sometimes is a big barrier, but we need to do more to encourage. And so this is why we want also to create webinars and toolkits that we give to beneficiaries, so they know from which fund to apply it and what is best fitted for the specific project. So next one, please. So the digital tools are very important. We saw it with COVID, how important digital literacy is, and how much migrants, especially refugees, suffered because of this lack of knowledge of digital literacy, but also they didn't have the digital equipment they needed. So we need to do more in all areas to enhance digital integration services. Next, please. Fostering participation and encounters with host society, we need to create community sponsorship programs for beneficiaries of international protection. it's very important to involve migrants and migrant organizations in all decision-making processes. Migrants have to participate in decisions that which affect them directly. And we created, and I mean, we're supporting member states to create also awards for schools, local communities, football festivals. We had a cooperation with the UEFA, which unfortunately couldn't happen because of COVID. But we try, you know, culture is a very important tool of communication between migrants and host society. And this is where we can bring people together. And this is very important. So next, please. So how I'm going to monitor all that, I'm sure Niem can help in what it has to do with the refugees. We're going to have a new Eurobarometer on integration published next year. We are going to do the analysis of progress and of common challenges based on common statistical indicators. There will be a scoreboard where we're discussing now with member states about the scoreboard. It's an ongoing discussion, how to assess the progress made in integration. And all this will publish also in the European website on integration. Can I have the next slide, please? Yeah, so here I have, yeah, that's the next. I think, is there something before? Is that just after? Yeah, there is something before about the migrant expert group. Yeah. Yes, so we set up a migrant expert group at the end of last year for the first time at the Commission in DG Home. We have 24 experts. They're migrants with background, with a migrant background, and they have outstanding knowledge and experience in migration, asylum, integration. We consult them regularly for issues concerning our policies. Can be integration, but can be also returns, can be different subjects that are related to migration, asylum, and integration. So this is very important, I think, because it's so important to hear from them directly. And we present, for instance, the action plan. It was one of the first actions we had with them. We presented the previous version of the action plan, with draft version, and we asked for the feedback, which we took into account into drafting this action plan. And also in the AMIF call last year in 2019, we had a special strand for promoting participation of migrants in the design and implementation of integration policies. So next, please. So I think, yes, that was about the monitoring. And the monitoring, yes, what I mentioned the website on integration, because we'll have a special tool which will be published there in 2022. So it will be open to everybody, and you can follow them, you know, will monitor and assess implementation of integration through this tool. So what is this next steps? We'll try to implement these actions in close cooperation with the other Commission departments, because it's not only us. We link with DG Education and Culture, for instance, and Erasmus Plus for education. We link with DG Justice for anti-racism. So there are different policies which cross ours, and we cooperate with all the different departments, but also, of course, with member states, local regional authorities, and civil society organizations, social and economic partners, private sector, host communities, diaspora organizations, and migrants themselves. So it's very important that all these actions that we propose and support are implemented in close cooperation with all these actors. And this platform I mentioned, this tool to monitor progress, will be open to everybody. It will be interactive. So I think that's will be a big change compared to what we had in the past. And we'll do a mid-review of the action plan in 2024. So thank you. I hope I was not too long. I put some links. You can have the slides, and the links are the links to the action plan and also to the website on integration. So some interesting if you want to look more in depth, the website on integration is a very important repertoire of resources in the field of integration in all over member states. We have coordinators in all member states who publish regularly information on what's happening in their member states. So you can also get ideas and best practices, etc. So, and it's a very dynamic platform. It's a very dynamic website. And now we just finished the migration into a new platform, Drupal 8. And the beginning of October, we'll have the new website, which is more interactive and more user-friendly. So that's it. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Angelique, for this very, very comprehensive presentation. I would suggest we just move on to our next step here, the panel debate, which will look into the relevance of the action plan in the context of 4 Niem countries. Sinem, over to you.
Yes, thank you so much and good afternoon. Thank you all for joining us today. And since we have the slide here, I will just welcome our speakers by saying their name and their countries and organizations and then move on. So today we have Professor Ennio Codini, and sorry for my pronunciation in advance if I make any mistake. I'm not really good at that. He is from Italy representing ISMO. Dr. Ghiere Blezite, Diversity Development Group from Lithuania, Ovidiu Voicu, the Center for Public Innovation in Romania, and we have Professor Sayaka Osanami from Malmö University, Sweden. So before going into the discussion, I will briefly just give a summary of the policy brief. It will be super brief because we don't have a lot of time. And in the policy brief, we gave an overview of the 2019 results from Niem research. And we aim to see to what extent the refugee integration policies of these 14 member states covered in Niem are in line with the guidelines, like guiding principles, values, and principles of the EU Action Plan on Integration and Inclusion. We made an overall assessment and we focused on cross-cutting sectoral areas in the EU Action Plan and their corresponding Niem analytical dimensions. Namely, we focused on employment, education, housing, and health as the 4 main sectoral areas. And also we also focused on building bridges between host societies and migrants and refugees, and also multi-stakeholder partnerships, which are also very important in the EU Action Plan. So generally, like in an overall sense, I can say that our analysis shows that there is a significant gap between regulations and policies in these Niem countries and the guiding principles in the EU Action Plan. And we think that this comparative analysis can be really important in several senses. So one of them is that it gives an opportunity to both policymakers and the refugee integration stakeholders to use the EU Action Plan to address the needs and gaps identified in Niem research. And also it gives the European Commission an opportunity to benefit from the Niem results. Angelique also mentioned that for monitoring and for other aspects as well, it can be really beneficial. And it can be used in the overall assessment of the achievement of the EU Action Plan, which will be implemented in the coming years. And also it gives some recommendations both to the European Commission and the member state side. For European Commission, it is more about how to foster the implementation of the EU Action Plan and how to make it more visible in the EU member states, because what we see as a general result, especially the previous one, because we cannot say something about the new action plan at the moment because we need to see the implementation first, but we have the first action plan and we have the evaluation, and we can say that especially our desk research shows that it is not very visible. It was not very visible in member states, especially in their integration policies. It was not really effective. So we are just giving some recommendations how to make it more visible in the member states. And also from member state side, we give some recommendations to how to use this EU Action Plan more effectively in their integration policies. So this is more or less what we try to do in the policy brief. If you're interested to see the recommendations and also the analysis, you can download it from either from Niem website or from MPG website. And so maybe we can go to the second slide. So as I said, we focused on 4 sectoral areas in the brief, But today we are just going to focus on employment and housing. First of all, we have time limitations, so we cannot really talk about every aspect. And the second thing is that housing and employment are generally found to be very weak across Niem countries. So that's why we wanted to focus on these two areas. And we see that there are like big differences between member states. So some of them are really good, the others are not really good. So, but most of them are not really good actually. So in terms of employment and housing. So we are going to discuss it with our speakers. And now I really would like to go to them before losing so much time. And first of all, I would like to start with the specific needs and gaps about employment and housing in these 4 countries. And if there are any positive developments since the Niem monitoring started in 2017. So for this, I would like to give the floor to Ovidiu first from Romania to give his intervention, and then we will go on with our other speakers.
Thank you, Niem, for this very good introduction of our study and presentation of the relationship with the EU Action Plan. I think I will focus in my question on the affordable and adequate accommodation for migrants, and in particular for beneficiaries of international protection, which in a country like Romania, which has a limited number of beneficiaries, I mean a few thousand people, remains a major challenge in both the initial phases of their presence in Romania and later on the long-term impact of integration. In the early stages of their staying in Romania, as asylum seekers, or immediately after they have received the recognition of their protection status, most of the beneficiaries are hosted in residential centers, which are affordable, basically free, but hardly adequate for accommodation, because they are collective housing with a very limited facilities offered to families in particular, and even bigger challenges for vulnerable persons, and in particular minors. Later on, when they leave these accommodations, after something between 1 and 2 years, depending on the period of before being granting asylum, they face other type of challenges on the rent market. The rising renting prices in the areas that offer better employment opportunities is a big challenge, because at the beginning, migrants have difficulties in finding a proper job or well-paid job. Also, there is discrimination on the rent market in the larger context of accusation of terrorism and the whole discussion about what's happening in Afghanistan and Syria and other countries. Landlords are avoiding renting to migrants for simply their prejudices and some stereotypes that still linger in the society. And another important problem, is that most migrants, including beneficiaries of international protection, do not have access to the social housing system in most localities. This social housing system is managed by the local public authorities, and there is very little cooperation between the settled authorities who manage the migration in general and the local public authorities. Now, of course, everything is related to the level of income the beneficiary of international protection can obtain in Romania, which opens the discussion on education and employment, but I won't go there. I only be saying that we have some improvements in the last few years. We had legislative changes in 2019 and this year, 2021, which are aiming to address some of the issues I have mentioned before. First, in 2019, the law introduced the possibility to offer money allowances to beneficiaries of international protection to cover for rent on the market rather than keeping them in residential centers, in the collective housing that I've mentioned. Later in 2021, that is, so this year, the allowance was increased to better reflect the actual cost, but there is an important trigger there. It can only be used on the occupancy of the residential centers has reached 90% of their capacity. So we are still waiting to see the impact of these measures. Also, since 2019, the law is more clearly affirming the rights of the beneficiaries of international protection to access social housing. This, in practice, should lead to they be able to work better to the mayories, to the local councils. We have seen this in a few localities, not many, and we are hoping that these changes, which are good, will make an impact in the future. I'll stop here with this first question.
Thank you so much, Ovidiu. I will just go on and so that we can have time for questions at the end. And Professor Codini from Italy, would you like to give your intervention about the first round, about Italy, needs and gaps in employment and housing, and any improvements?
Thank you. Thank you also for your pronunciation of my name. It's quite good, and my name is not an easy name from the point of view of pronunciation. Well, in Italy, national policies related to the employment and housing are the same for citizens and immigrants, and also for beneficiaries of international protection after the decision on application. At the national level, no targeted measures are addressed to migrants or to beneficiaries of international protections. This is, in general, can be considered positive, of course, but also negative, because for integration, for the lack of measure designed in connection with the needs, the specific needs of beneficiaries of international protection. That said, the area commonly considered to be the most problematic in Italy is that of housing. In general, prices are high and low-priced homes are few. And this is a specific problem for immigrants and especially for beneficiaries of international protection with little incomes, of course. Then there is the problem of discrimination. Discrimination in access for beneficiaries of protection. You can see discrimination behaviors put in place by natives against beneficiaries of international protection, as well as occasional discriminations by local governments in connection with public housing. About this situation, discrimination, you can see a positive development in course orientation against discrimination in last years. You can find a big number of pronunciations of court, tribunals, different authorities against discrimination. About needs. Discrimination of the part of natives derives first from mistrust on the part of natives with sometimes even racism. And then discrimination derives from concrete concern about the payment of the rent in connection with housing. Because beneficiaries of international protection are usually in a precarious economic situation. And this is a problem for owners, of course. So measures could be useful to change attitude first, to change attitude also through the provision of public guarantees for payments. This is maybe in this moment the main problem in Italy about private market of houses. public guarantees for payments against mistrust of owners. In fact, according to common opinion, if there were such guarantees, much more owners would rent an apartment to the beneficiaries of protection. That's all for this moment.
Thank you so much. And before going to the next speaker, I would like to once again remind, if you have any questions, you can leave your questions to question and answer chat. And you can just mention whom you are referring to the question or about which country. So then it can be easier for us to answer. And next, we can hear from Professor Sayaka from Sweden.
Hi, so first of all, I would like to say that Sweden faced the same situation when it comes to housing. Raising rent and scarcity of affordable housing is a serious problem. And the housing shortages is leading to an increased homelessness defined as not having a permanent address among BIPs. And so the homelessness status is increasing among BIPs, which is a problem. But housing policies are coordinated with other policy areas such as employment, education, healthcare, and social services. And especially since Sweden enforced settlement law in 2016, enforcing all municipalities to receive resettle certain amount of refugees in their municipality. These accessibility to employment, services, education is considered as important factors in making a quota how many refugees should resettle in each municipality. This settlement law has led to less pressures for bigger cities to receive resettle refugees in good conditions. But at the same time, it has increased in variations of housing conditions among those who choose their housing themselves or those who are assigned a housing through municipality. Those who choose to find their own accommodations, for them, NGOs and civil society actors play an important role in providing information and network. And in Sweden, there are many ongoing research about housing and refugees and newly arrived immigrants. So please contact or indicate in the chat if you want to know further. When it comes to employment, Sweden provides most favorable conditions in employment among all Niem countries. Everyone who have a valid residency permit longer than 13 months have the same access to services and rights as Swedish nationals. And again, there are specific policies targeted towards beneficiaries of international protections, but most of the employment, education, vocational trainings are mainstreamed into the policy. There has been increasing targeted initiatives towards immigrant women since around 2018, which, it's employment is more of a long-term investment, and we need to follow up to see the results of these initiatives, but these are in place in Sweden. I'll stop here.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much. Like all of you are super on time. And for this round, we can give the floor to Giedre from Lithuania.
Yes, thank you. So in terms of Lithuania, probably I should start with integration starts in refugee reception center. We are all asylum seekers and also beneficiaries of international protection stay the first 6 months, and then they move to continue their integration into municipalities. So probably talking about the challenges, the most part is when we are independent and start their life independently in the municipalities. The main challenges in terms of housing are mainly related, as already our partners mentioned, related to the lack of financial capacities and also unwillingness of host society members to rent their residence for beneficiaries of international protection. This problem is really big in Lithuania, especially if we are talking about Black people, Muslims, and refugees in general. The problem is that beneficiaries of international protection in Lithuania do not have feasible conditions to social housing. The accessibility is the same as for nationals, and the support for the rent of a residence place in the municipalities is only available during the integration period. When we are talking about the challenges in the integration of the labor market, again, we are talking, first of all, about language, lack of knowledge of national language, and also prejudices of the whole society. What the social studies reveal that majority of beneficiaries of international protection work low qualified work, and this also has a consequence for their psychological well-being. Talking about the positive developments in these integration years in housing and employment, they are mainly related to the action plan on foreigners' integration into the society that was adopted in 2018. Regarding to the housing, action plan foresees measures that assess the housing infrastructure in different municipalities and also describe the required actions to ensure housing to beneficiaries of international protection. We have much more positive improvements on employment side. So first of all, again, regarding on the measures foreseen in the action plan. First of all, action plan foresees measures on the awareness raising of employers about beneficiaries of international protection, their situation, what challenges they face in the labor market, as well as it foresees some kind of measures that are targeted to the assistance for beneficiaries of international protection who want to engage into the business in Lithuania. What it is also very important that due to the amendments of the law of employment, which was adopted in 2017, beneficiaries of international protection are classified as persons who qualify for subsidiary support in the labor market. So which means that we receive some kind of financial support if they engage into the labor market. And last but not least, it is the most recent amendments. It is amendments of the law on legal status of aliens that was adopted in 2020, January of 2020. And since then, asylum seekers are granted the right to work if within 6 months from the date of submitting the application for asylum, Migration Department has not adopted the decision regarding their status in the country. So I would say that probably Lithuania was left more or less the only country among the EU member states that does not have such right for asylum seekers to work. So it's really huge improvement in the country. So probably I will stop here for this moment.
Thank you so much. So now we will go to another aspect. When we look at the EU action plan, we see an emphasis on the need to use the EU funds provided through programs managed by member states in all areas, including employment and housing. When you look at your countries, in which areas has the EU funding made a real difference for better refugee integration policies or refugee integration support in general? And how relevant the EU support will be for the period 2021-2027 in your countries? So for this round, maybe we can start with Italy, Professor Codini.
Thank you. Well, in fact, in Italy, it is quite difficult to identify areas where European funds are made a difference. Because in Italy, you can find a big number of local practices connected with European funds. Local practices quite heterogeneous, with big differences. In addition, in Italy, there are not studies on the overall impact of European funds. It's impossible to read the studies about this subject. Anyway, there are, of course, interesting experiences in the field of housing, the main problem, as I said before, especially with regard to local experiences to find a home for young people, especially for young people, beneficiaries of international protection, of course. It will be possible to continue in this regard by better defining the interventions. As I said before, in connection with the private housing market, the main problem is building welcome societies about housing. So the hope is that initiative capable of creating trust in the owners will be developed. For example, creation of moments of meeting between owners and young foreigners. This will be important for trust. Second, establishment of financial guarantees in favor of the owners. For example, if the foreigner does not pay the rent, the municipality or others could be guarantee the payment of the rent. This could be a good development, an important development in Italy. Also in connection with European fund, why not? That's all for this moment, thank you.
Thank you so much. Ovidiu?
Well, it's good to be after Professor Codini because in Romania the situation is completely different. In fact, here I think that would be no integration program without EU funding, because basically the Romanian government is relying on AMI funding, so was relying on AMI funding until now to build any type of integration program for beneficiaries of international protection. So in all areas, the impact of EU funding is very important because it is financing whatever programs the government offers. I think it's important to say that here in Romania, the institution responsible with all aspects of immigration is called the General Inspectorate for Immigration, and it is a part of the national police. And this structure of the national police is also in charge with the integration aspects of immigration. Naturally, being policemen, it's leaning towards the security aspects of immigration, and integration remains only a small part of their work, and they have little interest to ask for bigger funding in this area. For example, I will give you some anecdotal evidence. This year in April, we have a public debate on the National Strategy for Social Inclusion, which was, of course, led by the Ministry of Social Protection. The General Inspectorate for Immigration was required or was asked to include some indicators about integration of beneficiaries of international protection and migrants in general. And what they have proposed are the indicators such as the number of illegal immigrants discovered and expelled, the number of persons prosecuted and jailed, and so on. So everything was in this direction. As I said, all components of the integration programs are supporting from EU funding. Expect the payment of the officer involved, of course. Usually they are contracted to NGOs under the form of grants, and this is probably going to create additional problems in the coming years because there is little coordination between the General Inspectorate and other institutions. we didn't have a tough policy document, a national strategy on integration between 2019 and 2021, so in the last 3 years. And now, when we have one, it is still relying on European funding to implement all these components, which will be a problem under the new budgetary framework. Now, because AMI funding will be focused on the initial phases of the integration, which remains under the coordination of the General Inspectorate, we have to see how other institutions will be able to support long-term integration measures that will be supported from other funds, other European, like European Social Funds and the European Regional Development Fund, or national funds. I think the key for the next years in Romania on integration of migrants will be a swift move from the current way of managing the integration of beneficiaries of international protection and the new approach that is proposed under the EU budgetary framework, and this is accepted by all member states, including Romania. Thank you.
Thank you so much. And Giedre, how is the situation in Lithuania in terms of funding?
Well, probably I just could echo to what Ovidius said, because all integration measures are more or less related and based on AMIF funds or generally EU funds, and only very small part of the budget is from the state. And what I see, what is the problem also that, well, integration activities are implemented in the frame of the projects. So that means that it is really hard to think about any strategic points and continuity of those projects. And another problem that, you know, the projects are implemented in some kind of guidelines or no project proposals, but for instance, integration is not like so planned process as it could be. And for instance, there are many cases when suddenly, you know, some kind of problems raised, for instance, for beneficiaries of those services, and if we are not foreseeing some kind of measures under the projects, so of course it's really difficult to claim that you have to spend the money on one another service. So it's really raised a lot of questions for NGOs, because yes, it's the same as I think in Romania, that NGOs are the main service providers, the main organizers of integration in the country.
Thank you so much. And lastly, for this round, we can hear from Sweden, Sayaka.
Yes, I think Sweden, the situation is similar to Italy. Sweden do not rely on EU funding for integration programs. And as I said before, in all aspects of policies, integration is one of the key priorities and clearly budgeted within the state budget. And also together with integration, segregation is also a very important issue that Swedish government is budgeting, spending a lot of money to tackle on. And but that said, with the when we look at the budget for 2021 and forward, in accordance with the EU long-term budget, we see that the AMIF portion will increase in aspects of what is defined as migration. So that is early initiatives. And already in 2021 compared to 2020, the budget is doubled. And in 2023, I think it'll be tripled.
Okay, thank you so much. And for the last round, we are going to look at the good practices, because another key message of the EU Action Plan is that member states are encouraged to transfer and upscale innovative solutions across Europe. And in your countries, are there any models that can inspire improvements in other countries in similar conditions, for example, and spread of values that underlie the EU Action Plan? For this, I think we can start with Sweden to hear some good practices, maybe either from employment side or housing side.
Yes, in many parts of Sweden, newly arrived immigrants and refugees are provided with a 100-hour civic education, where they get information on society, culture, and healthcare of the host community. And this is also digitalized, touching upon, the initiative by EU. So during the COVID situation, they still could access all these informations about Sweden through digital tools. And these informations are given in different languages, depending on BAP's mother tongue. And oftentimes, the information are given by what we call civic and health communicators, who they themselves have an immigrant or refugee background and speak the language of the community. And this makes it easier for them to really understand the process and also to understand the information that are giving. And also, in Sweden, there are lots of initiatives that involve multi-stakeholders perspective, and you can read more about it in Swedish national report. But Niem Swedish team have collaborated closely with civil society organizations, which implemented a method where newly arrived refugees are matched to different activities and organizations, and learn the language, get necessary network, health, and information about health. Mental health is also a very targeted area, and through interaction with host society, make connections and adapt to the local conditions and their needs. So again, like I said, you can read more about the model in the Swedish national report.
Thank you so much. Jedrzej?
Well, to be honest, when I received this question, I was really thinking a lot, what should I share with you? Because to be frankly with you, I don't know, like very good practices, like except if we are, of course, if we are talking on what NGOs, for instance, doing, we can find some good practices and interesting projects. But when we discussed this question, we decided to share our experiences on the policy level of that EU action plan, the action plan on foreigners integration that I already mentioned. It was adopted in 2018, but actually it is the following action of the previous action plan. But what it is new that in this recent action plan, beneficiaries of international protection are included as a target group of the action plan, and it was not done before. Action plan seeks to improve the implementation of integration measures for foreign citizens in Lithuania, and to ensure successful integration into society. And it includes really very wide prospect of measures to foster interinstitutional cooperation and to improve access to labor market, education, as well as social and health services. It also aims at promoting cooperation between foreigners and local communities in reducing discrimination against foreign nationals in general. Another aim of the action plan is also to improve integration of female migrants and to establish a system that monitors migrants' integration process and the implementation of migration-related policies. And previously today, we also talked about the importance of the monitoring, and I would like to emphasize that this is the third year of the action plan, and we still do not have like very clear monitoring mechanism. So when you can't see then how the measures are implemented in practice, it's really like to predict if they really work and how we can improve it in the future. So I don't know, at least we don't have such knowledge that it is planning to do monitoring, but the monitoring still is on on the paper. So that's the thing, that it's very important to talk not only about the legislative part, but also how these foresting measures are implemented in practice. So yeah, probably stop here. Thank you.
Thank you so much. But the EU action plan, not the action plan in Lithuania, we believe that I think it can be a really good model for other countries who are in similar situations. So like at the end, it is interesting. So it is suitable for this question for sure. And Professor Codini, Italy, how is the situation?
In Italy too, I think it's quite difficult to found a model, to speak about models. The basic regulation is from the state, but as I said before, this basic regulation is based on an approach characterized by the adoption of the same measures for citizens and foreigners, the same measures. Maybe this can be inspiring, I don't know. Then there is the local level. The local level is most interesting. As I said before, interesting experiences can be found at this level, at the local level. But really, every municipality follows its own path. Every municipality. It's difficult to speak about models in general. Every municipality follows its own path of experiments for political, territorial, historical, social reasons, etc. We cannot talk about models unless you consider this differentiation, typical of Italian experience, this differentiation between municipalities, a model. The state establishes formal equality, and each municipality can, in Italy, look for ways to solve a problem with a big number of different solutions in different municipalities. Maybe this, you can consider this aspect interesting.
Thank you so much. And to close the discussion, lastly, we will hear from Ovidiu.
Well, thank you. We should have close to Sweden, because I have the feeling that only Sweden is a model to follow in the European Union related to how they handle the migrants. The policy brief that we have discussed today, and generally our entire Niem research, is showing that Romania is lagging behind other EU countries. So it's difficult to find models or inspiring practices. However, I think we have something that shows promise. It's newly implemented, and it's called local support teams. In my previous intervention, I have talked about the lack of coordination between various public institutions and the low involvement of local public authorities. These local support teams are an instrument which is trying to answer some of these problems. As the name says, the representative of the central government, the local institutions, NGO offering services, and where available of the migrants themselves, gather together to develop a tailored response to the need of migrants. For example, to help them find a better job, or to help them deal with discrimination on the rent market, or even to connect with NGOs that offer services or network of migrants where available. These local teams were piloted with support from UNHCR with good results earlier in 2018, 2019. Since 2019, they were actually included in the relevant legislation related to migration in Romania at the primary level of the law. Unfortunately, the pandemic delayed the adoption of the needed secondary legislation and the creation of the teams themselves, because the situation last year and the beginning of this year was quite difficult with the number of cases of COVID-19 here in Romania and everywhere else. So only this year, in 2021, the first teams were actually created in some of the cities where there are more migrants than present. We are now monitoring the effectiveness of these teams. And when I say we, I don't mean only our organization, but the Coalition for the Rights of Migrants and Refugees, which is a platform of the civil society organizations promoting the rights of migrants, which was created and it is supported with the support of Niem project. So this is maybe also to conclude positively, one of the small contributions that the project itself may offer to inspiring practices maybe in the future. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Thank you. We have still a couple of minutes. Maybe before going into the questions part, I can ask Angelique her reaction, listening to these 4 countries from different dimensions. Some of them are more positive, some of them are really lagging behind. So looking from the European Commission perspective, what is your reaction to these interventions? You are muted.
Sorry, my mouse didn't work to unmute. No, that's really interesting. Okay, we know the discrepancies. I mean, most of us is not new, especially between countries north and south. What was interesting for me is mainly about the funding. That countries were really the funding had really played a role, and countries which not, because they have their own budgets and they don't rely so much on funding. So I was wondering, does that mean? I don't know the numbers. Does, for instance, I was curious, is Sweden participating in less projects on EU funding because it relies more on its own funding? I don't have figures in front of me. Is that the case? It would be interesting to know that.
Sweden is participating in a lot of programs and research, and I think research and local initiatives. I didn't have a chance to say, but like Professor Codini was saying, I think there are lots of local projects that are funded by UMIF, and these impact the local communities. But it's also very difficult to understand the impact. And also, I think when we were working with the indicators, the difficulty that Sweden have is that the difference between, because the portion of state budget is quite large and very specific, the details of where the UMIF money is going and benefiting, it's a little bit more difficult to identify because it's a local level, but Sweden is participating in projects, and
I know, because you are a lot also in to exchange good practices with other member states to support. So this is, that's the next thing I would like to say, that it's so important that we work all together and once, help the others and support in other actions in terms of best practices. Because, for instance, in the context of the European Integration Network, the IN, which are the national, the member states, the national authorities dealing with integration, and we do a lot of case studies and best practices, and we have the mutually assistance programs, for instance, and we see how important it is, the role of the more, I would like to say, the richer countries of the North to help support the countries of the South with best practices and exchange of information. And so this is something which, you may not benefit directly so much from the EU funds, but your role is very important to supporting other countries. Also, I think for Italy, I was a bit surprised. Yes, it's true that it's very heterogeneous. Yes, I have this impression as well, and it's difficult to assess. But as Italy has a lot of migrants, especially refugees, because we're speaking in refugees in this case, I had the impression that, personally at least, that the EU funding played an important role. Maybe it's difficult to assess it. It's more difficult to assess it, but I have the feeling that it was, as it is for Greece, I mean, everything is done with EU funding, okay, as you said, for Romania as well, or Lithuania, in the same situation. So maybe yes, because you have in Italy, it's also the way the country is organized in the different regions, and so maybe it's different to it's what is happening in the north, very different from what is happening in the south, and the way they participate in EU funding. And yeah, my other reaction is yeah, about the housing, because I have a special interest in housing actually, because I'm dealing also a part of, you know, in the integration team, I'm dealing with Greece, but I'm dealing with housing as well. And I have always a curious ear when I hear about housing. And it's what I see is that, yes, in the north you have more developed policies, but the problems of racism are the same everywhere. The problems of convincing landlords to rent, you know, to migrants, they're everywhere. So it doesn't have to do with the country. I mean, richer countries can put more money into supporting schemes, but this is something, and I was thinking this is something we need to tackle, you know, then EU-wide. Maybe in another, you know, AMIF call, put something specific about this issue. And it is a big issue, I think, everywhere. It is a big issue. This which is links to racism, and because I think if we didn't have that, things would be much better in terms of reduce homelessness. And the other thing which is quite important is about asylum seekers. I mean, Romania, you mentioned that in Romania that they are in residential halls, but then the challenges start once, you know, when they become beneficiaries of international protection. And I think you find this in many countries which have refugees. I mean, it's the same. Well, in Italy, it's sort of the same. You said they have the same rights, but they do have the same rights, but can they find the same opportunities? So in the end, the challenges they are also the same in one way or another. So that was, yeah, that was also interesting. And this is something which also could be tackled Europe-wide. Maybe we have to reflect on that, but that was interesting for me to listen, because the same problem is everywhere in the end. I mean, and even in Sweden, there's homelessness increasing. I mean, even with the support of the state. Yeah, I think it was really interesting. It's always so interesting to hear directly, you know, from stakeholders, from the member states, with your experience, and so it's so important for us. So we take this into account, you know, when we do calls for projects, and yeah, for the next AMI, for instance. It's really, it was very interesting for me. Thank you very much for this.
Thank you so much, Angelique. Just like we are running out of time, but just one remark, not as a question, maybe to take with this meeting and then maybe reflect on later. It is about the EU funding still. As I heard from some of the countries, for example, Romania and Lithuania, and from Italy as well. So the EU funding is really important, but most of the time it's fragmented. So it is mostly project-based, and it puts a lot of burden on NGOs in terms of integration. So they have to do the services, they have to give the services, because the services are not really sustainable through EU funding. So this is one of the issues that we really hear for so many years from NGOs and like from different countries. So, and we see that in the action plan, the funding is really important, and it's emphasized in every sector, very specifically in a very bold way. This gives hopes. Maybe this is something to tackle during the implementation of the action plan. it's a really bold question, not to be answered at this stage, of course.
Yeah.
It's a difficult to answer, I know, but really something about the funding, something to consider maybe from the European Commission side. So that was like from my side, that was the comment.
Yeah, I can reply to that very shortly.
Okay, yes, sure.
It's an offhand answer, but you know, the different funds, they have their rules, the financial regulation. So it's very difficult to be flexible. Although what you say is quite sensible, we cannot make things easier for NGOs, for instance, because it's the rules are there and we cannot change the financial rules of the Commission. But what we can do and what we're trying to do in this action plan is to support member states how to access funds, to bring them at the table, to give them tips. Even with member states, we show them how to do a proper application, for instance, to be successful. We send models of applications when they need it. And say, no, this fund, you know, this project would fit better this fund. So like the ESF, for instance, not only for AMIF. So this is what we're trying to do, you know, to explain things and to support in accessing the funds. Because on the other hand, we see funds, the money is there and member states cannot access it. And this is a crazy situation, of course, and it's not what we want. We want funds to be absorbed in the right way. But we're trying to support with kits, with his toolkits, with his webinars, how to access the different funds. So this is what I can say, you know, as a...
Yeah, thank you so much. Yeah, thank you. It's it was important. And now I'm giving the floor to Alexander again to close. And thank you so much for everyone, like for your contributions. And Alex.
Thank you. I think we have an open question in the chat box. I would like to answer that first. The question is whether the scores of the country across all indicators can be accessed somewhere. Well, we have at this time on the Niem website the indicator system and the scoring systems online. But we plan to upload the final data set once this final round of evaluations is concluded. That brings me actually to our little outlook on what's next in Niem. This evaluation 2 research will be concluded until the end of the year. There will be a report published at the latest in January next year. At the same time, national reports will be published in all the partner countries. There will also be a conference event around the final report next year. And then much earlier, there will be an additional special analysis on persons under humanitarian protection. And I was just briefly asked my colleague Kamena to tell a little bit about this paper, which will be available, I think, in the next 2 weeks.
Thanks, Alexander. Yes, I just want to take the opportunity to announce that the Immigration Policy Group will also publish in the next weeks another in-depth study, always in the framework of the Niem project and research that investigate how national laws and policies meet the integration needs of humanitarian status holders. And it will focus the study on data from 2019, and we show relevant scores referring to the country that participate to the Niem project. Just a few words, we know that humanitarian protection is a form of non-European harmonized protection, meaning that covers a different range of different situations and offers a form of protection that is complementary to the traditional European status that we have examined today. And since the emergence of the refugee crisis, actually several member states start to narrow down the eligibility criteria for migrants to access to national protection status. So we think that this study is important because try to fill a gap in the literature by shedding light on a group that is often overlooked by policy making and research. So we know that the European legal framework does not include specific provision on this topic that falls mainly on national competence. And so the paper will show that the lack of common standards may result in a different level of protection, meaning that humanitarian status holders generally enjoy less favorable legal condition than refugees and beneficiaries of subsidiary protection. Also, they rarely experience favorable conditions to integrate in different areas of life, and wide gaps exist in policies that should actively support the long-term integration. So just to conclude, member states seem still reluctant to adopt policy for long-term integration of humanitarian status holders, who often enjoy a very precarious legal status and are unable to settle down in the country and risk to become irregular. So this is just a few key findings from our research, and I hope if you're interested, you'll find more on the Niem website, also on the FGO website in the next days. Thank you.
Okay, thanks, Carmen, for this sneak preview of this special analysis. We are at the end. I think that was really a fascinating debate because it really made clear how different integration standards are across the EU, but also how EU instruments really can make a difference. Also how EU funds are of very different relevance depending where you are in Europe. And indeed that the wheel doesn't have to be reinvented again, because there are so many good practices out there that can be adopted in other countries. Thank you everyone who listened in today. Thanks to all the speakers and for being available today. Big thank you to the team at the Institute of Public Affairs who supported us today. Thanks to my colleagues at MPG. Hope you will stay interested in Niem and its results. Thank you and goodbye.